Lena Thompson adjusted the strap of her tote bag as she stepped into the gleaming lobby of the high-rise building. She had tutored in some nice homes before, but this was on a whole different level. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and a concierge who looked like he belonged in a luxury magazine ad. "Miss Thompson?" the concierge asked with a polite smile. "Yes, that's me," she answered, gripping the strap of her bag a little tighter. "The driver will take you up." The driver. She had expected to be buzzed in like any other tutoring gig. But instead, she was escorted to a private elevator, which, as soon as the doors shut, whisked her up to the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal a breathtaking space. The entire city stretched out beyond the glass walls, the furniture sleek but warm, and the air filled with the faint scent of something expensive. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, sat at the dining table, flipping through a workbook with all the enthusiasm of someone attending a mandatory dentist appointment. His dark brown hair fell into his eyes as he slouched in his chair. "You must be Benjamin," Lena said, stepping forward with a warm smile. The boy looked up, his green eyes assessing her. "Yeah, are you my new tutor?" "That depends," she teased, setting her bag down. "Are you the student who's going to make my job easy, or do I have to bribe you with snacks?" That got a small smile out of him. "I like snacks." "Good," she said. "Then we'll get along just fine." Before she could pull out her materials, a deep, authoritative voice filled the space. "Benjamin, manners." Lena turned toward the sound, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit his broad frame effortlessly. His dark, slightly tousled hair and chiseled features made him look like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. But it wasn't just his looks that made her pause, it was his presence. Commanding, confident, like he was used to people listening when he spoke, Benjamin straightened instantly. "Sorry, Dad. This is Lena." The man's piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief second, Lena forgot how to breathe. "Elijah Donovan," he introduced himself, stepping forward and offering his hand. His voice was smooth, deep like velvet wrapped around steel. Lena shook his hand, trying to ignore the warmth that shot up her arm. "Lena Thompson, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Donovan. Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Benjamin's last tutor wasn't the right fit." Lena nodded. "I'll do my best to make sure he gets what he needs." Elijah studied her for a moment before giving a slight nod. "Good, I'll be in my office if you need me." And just like that, he disappeared down a hallway, leaving Lena standing there, trying to shake off the lingering electricity of their brief exchange. She took a deep breath and turned back to Benjamin. "All right, let's get started." For the next hour, Lena worked with Benjamin, quickly realizing he was much smarter than he let on. He wasn't struggling because he didn't understand the material, he was struggling because he was bored. "You already know this stuff, don't you?" she asked, watching as he solved another problem without even looking at the formula sheet. Benjamin hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, kinda, she pressed. He sighed. "I just don't care about it. Dad wants me to be top of my class, but I don't see the point." Lena leaned forward. "What do you care about?" Benjamin hesitated, then finally mumbled. "I like designing things, buildings mostly." Lena's lips curled into a smile. "Architecture?" he nodded. "That's amazing," she said. "You know, math is a huge part of that. You'll need it for measurements, structural integrity, all that fun stuff." Benjamin frowned. "I didn't think about that. Maybe we should start incorporating some architecture-based problems into our sessions," she suggested. "Make it more interesting for you." For the first time, he looked intrigued. "You do that?" "Of course, learning should be fun, not just something you do because someone tells you to." Benjamin grinned. "You're way cooler than my last tutor." Lena laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." After the session, Lena was packing up her things when she noticed Elijah leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with an unreadable expression. "You got him to focus," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. Lena straightened. "He's a bright kid. He just needs the right motivation." Elijah studied her, his gaze intense. "Most tutors give up on him by the first week." "Well, I'm not most tutors," she said, meeting his gaze. Something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable yet undeniably warm. I'd like you to continue working with him, he said. Name your rate, Lena blinked. My usual rate is double it. Her mouth fell open slightly. What? Elijah pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her, his presence almost overwhelming. I want the best for my son. And it's clear you're the best. Lena swallowed hard. I appreciate that, but triple it. She stared at him. Mr. Donovan, I don't need Elijah, he corrected, his voice softer now. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Elijah, she said hesitantly. His lips curved slightly, and for a moment, she got the distinct impression that he enjoyed throwing her off balance. I'll see you next week, Lena, he said, his voice lingering over her name in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. And just like that, he walked away, leaving her standing there, heart pounding, completely unaware that this job was about to change her life forever. Lena returned the following week, trying to convince herself that this was just another tutoring job. But the moment the private elevator doors slid open again, she knew she was lying to herself. Benjamin was waiting at the table, already flipping through his notebook. He looked up as she stepped inside and gave her a nod of acknowledgement. You're early, he noted. You sound surprised, she teased, setting her bag down. Benjamin shrugged. Most people aren't. Lena pulled out her materials. Well, I'm not most people. A voice from behind echoed the sentiment. That much is clear. Lena turned to find Elijah standing near the kitchen island, a glass of something dark in his hand. His suit jacket was gone, leaving only the crisp white dress shirt that fit him far too well. The sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal the strong lines of his forearms. Lena forced herself to focus. Mr. Donovan, she greeted, keeping her tone professional. Elijah, he corrected again, his gaze steady as he took a sip from his glass. Lena cleared her throat and turned back to Benjamin. All right, let's get started. Over the next hour, she introduced new problems with an architectural angle, and Benjamin was noticeably more engaged. He leaned forward, asking questions and even sketching rough designs in the margins of his notebook. Lena couldn't help but smile. See. Told you this would be more interesting. Benjamin tapped his pencil against the table. Yeah, don't gloat. From the corner of her eye, she saw Elijah watching. He wasn't hovering, but his presence was unmistakable. When their session wrapped up, Benjamin stretched and stood. I'm gonna grab a snack. As he disappeared down the hall, Lena gathered her things, but before she could reach for her bag, Elijah spoke. You're good with him. She glanced up. He's easy to work with when he's actually interested in what he's learning. Elijah set his glass down on the island. Most people assume he's difficult. He's not, Lena said simply. He's just waiting for someone to notice what actually excites him. Elijah studied her for a long moment. And what excites you, Lena? The unexpected question caught her off guard. She hesitated. Helping people understand things in a way that makes them care. His gaze didn't waver. That's rare. Lena shifted her weight. It shouldn't be. Something flickered across his expression, but before she could decipher it, he picked up a sleek black card from the counter and held it out to her. Dinner, he said. She blinked. What? I'd like to take you to dinner, he clarified. Tomorrow night. Lena's pulse kicked up. I don't think that's necessary. Elijah arched a brow. Necessary? No, but I want to. Lena hesitated. Is this about Benjamin? No, he said smoothly. This is about you. There was something about the way he said it certain, unwavering, that made it impossible to look away. I don't think that's a good idea, she finally said. His lips curved slightly. Is that your professional opinion? Lena exhaled. It's my rational one. So if I ask again in a few weeks, will I get a different answer? She narrowed her eyes. You're assuming persistence will change my mind. Elijah tilted his head slightly. You don't strike me as the type to be easily swayed. That made her smile just a little. I'm not. Good, he said, his voice lower now. That makes this more interesting. Lena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Benjamin called from the other room. Dad, the Wi-Fi's being dumb again. Elijah exhaled through his nose, the moment between them breaking. I'll see you next week, Lena. She turned toward the elevator, her pulse still unsteady as the doors slid shut. She told herself that was the end of it, but deep down she knew better. Lena arrived at the Penthouse for her next session with Benjamin, determined to keep things strictly professional. She had replayed her last conversation with Elijah more times than she cared to admit, but she wasn't going to let his interest distract her. This was a job, a well-paying one at that. The elevator doors slid open, and she stepped inside, expecting to find Benjamin at the dining table like usual. Instead, she was met with the sight of a long mahogany dining table set with gleaming silverware and crisp white plates. A faint aroma of rosemary and garlic lingered in the air. Elijah stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked completely at ease, but there was something distinctly intentional about the way he was waiting for her. Lena stopped short. "This isn't a tutoring session." "No," Elijah admitted, setting his glass down. "Benjamin's staying with my sister tonight." Lena exhaled. "Elijah, I made dinner," he interrupted, gesturing toward the table. "At least hear my pitch before you say no." She folded her arms. "A pitch," he nodded. "You're determined to keep things professional, I respect that, but I also think we both know there's something here." Lena's heart picked up speed, but she kept her expression neutral. "And you assume a meal will change my mind?" Elijah's mouth quirked at the corner. "I assume that if you sit down, you might realize I'm not nearly as intimidating as you think I am." Lena hesitated. Every rational part of her screamed that this was a bad idea, but curiosity, dangerous, insistent curiosity, had her stepping forward. Elijah pulled out a chair for her, waiting until she sat before taking the seat across from her. A server, because of course there was a server, appeared to pour her a glass of wine before disappearing just as quickly. Lena glanced at the carefully plated meal. "You really made this?" Elijah leaned back in his chair. "You sound surprised." She lifted a brow. "I'm just saying I didn't peg you as the homemade dinner type." His fingers tapped lightly against the rim of his glass. "I don't do it often. But when I want something, I put in the effort." Lena picked up her fork, ignoring the way his words sent a ripple of warmth through her. "So this is effort." Elijah met her gaze. "This is interest." Lena swallowed. She wasn't oblivious. She knew when a man was pursuing her. And Elijah Donovan, with his wealth, his confidence, his ability to command a room with just his presence, was doing exactly that. Still, she wasn't about to make it easy for him. "And what happens if I'm not interested?" Elijah took a sip of his wine, unfazed. "Then we enjoy a good meal, and you leave knowing I don't take rejection personally." Lena studied him, searching for any hint of arrogance or entitlement, but there was none. Just calm certainty, as if he was giving her the space to make her own decision. She exhaled and took a bite of the meal. It was, unsurprisingly, delicious. Elijah watched her reaction. "If you're about to tell me you're impressed, try to contain it." Lena rolled her eyes. "It's edible." Elijah let out a low chuckle, and for the first time she saw something in him that wasn't carefully measured control. Something real. She sat back in her chair. "Fine, I'll humor you. Why me?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "Because you're different." Lena arched a brow. "That's vague." He set his glass down. "Most people in my world want something from me, a deal, a favor, an opportunity." "You don't." She tilted her head. "So you're interested because I'm not." Elijah shook his head. "I'm interested because despite everything you challenge me, you're not afraid to push back, you don't cater to expectations." Lena considered that. "And you like that?" His gaze didn't waver. "I do." A strange energy settled between them, something charged, something Lena wasn't sure she was ready to name. She set her fork down. "This is still a bad idea." "Why?" Lena gestured vaguely. "Because of Benjamin. Because of professionalism." "Because this isn't my world." Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Benjamin likes you, and I'd never put you in a position that compromises your work." Lena exhaled. "And the last part," Elijah's expression softened just a fraction. "Lena, this world isn't what defines me. It's just part of my life." She hesitated. "Still." Elijah studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "All right." Lena blinked. "All right." He pushed his plate away. "I won't press. You've made your stance clear." Strangely, she felt almost disappointed. "That's it." Elijah's lips curved. For now. Lena wasn't sure whether to be relieved or unnerved by how easily he accepted her refusal. But as she left that night, the weight of the conversation lingered. And despite every logical reason to walk away, she knew this wasn't over. Lena arrived for her next session with Benjamin, determined to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the thought of seeing Elijah again. She had told herself that their last dinner was just that, a dinner, a moment outside of work, but deep down, she knew better. The elevator doors opened and she stepped into the penthouse, expecting the usual quiet luxury. Instead, lively voices filled the space. A woman with sharp features and an expensive-looking blazer stood near the kitchen island, flipping through a glossy magazine. Beside her, Benjamin slumped in a chair, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Elijah stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his posture tense. At the sound of Lena's arrival, his gaze snapped to hers, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his expression. "You must be the tutor," the woman said, her tone assessing. Lena set her bag down smoothly. "Lena Thompson." The woman arched a perfectly shaped brow. "Catherine Donovan, Elijah's sister." Lena extended a hand, but Catherine merely glanced at it before returning her attention to Benjamin. "I was just telling my nephew how important it is to stay competitive. If he wants to excel, he needs an advantage beyond standard tutoring." Benjamin rolled his eyes. "She means private academies filled with kids who don't actually do their own work." Catherine's lips pursed. "They network, Benjamin. Connections matter." Elijah exhaled. "Catherine, this isn't the time." She ignored him, turning back to Lena. "I assume you have experience with elite education." Lena met her gaze evenly. "I have experience helping students succeed regardless of where they come from." Catherine studied her for a beat before offering a thin smile. "How noble." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Lena is here to tutor Benjamin." "That's all that matters." Catherine's gaze flickered between them, sharp and knowing. "Is that all?" Lena's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I should get started with the session." Benjamin shot her a grateful look as she steered him toward the dining table, pulling out his work. Catherine lingered a moment longer, then finally turned back to Elijah, speaking in a lowered voice. Lena couldn't make out the words, but the tension in Elijah's stance was unmistakable. She focused on Benjamin, walking him through his exercises, but her mind kept drifting to Elijah, to the way his shoulders grew rigid under scrutiny, to the way Catherine's words seemed to dig under his skin. After an hour, Benjamin stretched his arms over his head. "I think that's enough academics for one afternoon," Lena smiled. "I'll allow it." Benjamin packed up his books, then hesitated. "You know, my dad's different when you're around." Lena blinked. "What do you mean?" Benjamin shrugged. "He usually doesn't let people get close, but with you, it's like he's actually paying attention." A warmth spread through her chest, but she pushed it aside. "Your dad is a busy man." Benjamin gave her a knowing look, but didn't press the issue. He grabbed his things and disappeared down the hallway, leaving her alone in the vast, quiet space. She turned, startled to find Elijah standing near the kitchen, watching her. "I should go," she said, reaching for her bag. He stepped closer. "My sister can be difficult." Lena slung the strap over her shoulder. "She's protective." Elijah exhaled. "She's convinced that anyone who enters my life wants something." Lena met his gaze. "And do you believe that?" His expression softened. "No." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. He took another step forward, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. "I meant what I said before, Lena. I don't want you to feel pressured, but I won't pretend there's nothing between us." Her breath hitched. "Elijah," he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers in the lightest touch. "Tell me to stop and I will." Lena's heart pounded. She should walk away. She should remind him that this was a job, a professional arrangement. But instead, she found herself standing perfectly still, caught in the pull of something undeniable. She didn't tell him to stop. Instead, she whispered, "This is complicated." Elijah's lips curved slightly, his voice low. "I can handle complicated." Lena exhaled shakily. "I don't know if I can." His fingers curled gently around hers. "Then let me show you that you can." Against every logical thought, against the voice in her head reminding her of all the reasons this was a bad idea, she didn't pull away. And for the first time, she let herself wonder what it would be like if she didn't fight it. Lena stood at the threshold of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Elijah's hand had barely brushed hers, yet the weight of that simple touch lingered far longer than she wanted to admit. She had told herself she wouldn't get involved, that professionalism mattered above all else. But Elijah Donovan wasn't a man who was easy to ignore. She stepped back, putting distance between them. "I should go." Elijah didn't move to stop her. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held something deeper, something unwavering. "All right." She turned toward the elevator, willing her heartbeat to slow. Just as the doors slid open, his voice reached her again, low and certain. "I'll see you next week, Lena." She didn't look back. If she did, she wasn't sure she'd be able to leave. The days between their next meetings stretched longer than usual. She found herself thinking about their last conversation more than she should. About the way Elijah's presence seemed to fill every space he occupied. About the way Benjamin had noticed a shift in his father before she had even allowed herself to. When the next tutoring session arrived, she stepped into the penthouse with careful resolve. This was about Benjamin. Nothing more. She found him at the dining table, sketchbook open, pencil moving in smooth, precise strokes. He didn't look up right away, too focused on his work. Lena slid into the chair beside him, curiosity tugging at her. "What are you working on?" Benjamin flipped the sketchbook toward her, revealing a detailed drawing of a sleek, modern building. It wasn't just the lines that impressed her, it was the thought behind them. The angles, the structure, the way everything flowed seamlessly together. "This is incredible," she admitted. Benjamin shrugged, but there was a flicker of pride in his expression. "It's just something I've been messing with." She traced a finger along the edge of the page. "You should take this seriously." His gaze flickered. "Dad would never go for it." Lena frowned. "Why not?" Benjamin hesitated. "He thinks I should focus on things that are practical, that architecture is more of a hobby than a career." Lena sat back. "Has he actually said that?" Benjamin looked away. "Not exactly. But he's always pushing for the best schools, the best grades. He doesn't think about what I actually want to do." Lena considered his words carefully. Elijah Donovan was a man who valued precision, control. But she had also seen the way he looked at his son, the way he wanted the best for him. Maybe he just didn't realize what that truly meant. She made a mental note to bring it up later. For now, she tapped the page. "We're going to use this today. I'll teach you how to calculate load-bearing walls." Benjamin's eyes lit up, and just like that, the tension in the room eased. Later that evening, as Lena packed up her things, she sensed Elijah's presence before she even turned around. He was standing near the windows once again, hands in his pockets, gaze distant. She exhaled, steeling herself. "Benjamin's talented." Elijah's eyes flicked toward her. "I know." Lena didn't hesitate. "Then why haven't you told him that?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I push him because I want him to have options." She stepped closer. "But have you ever asked him what he wants?" Elijah studied her, something unreadable in his expression. "You think I'm failing him?" Lena shook her head. "I think you're protecting him in the only way you know how, but sometimes protection can feel like pressure." The silence between them stretched. Then, finally, Elijah exhaled. "What does he want?" Lena smiled. "To build something real." Elijah's gaze softened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of uncertainty in him. He was a man who always had the answers, but this was new territory. She reached for her bag, hesitating just briefly before speaking again. "Talk to him, Elijah." He nodded once, and as she stepped into the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something important. Lena didn't expect to hear from Elijah outside of their usual sessions, but 2 days later he called. His voice was quieter than usual, less commanding, more reflective. "I spoke to Benjamin," he said, "about architecture." She leaned against the counter in her tiny apartment, surprised but pleased, and he was hesitant at first, Elijah admitted. "Like he thought I wouldn't take him seriously, but once he started talking, he didn't stop. He had ideas, plans. He's been thinking about this for a long time." Lena felt warmth spread through her chest. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd support him," Elijah said simply. "That if this is what he wants, I'll make sure he has every opportunity to pursue it." Relief flooded her. That's all he needed to hear. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Elijah's voice dropped to something more personal. "You were right, Lena, again." She smiled softly. "I usually am," a low chuckle. "I'm beginning to accept that." She didn't know why, but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. "I'm glad you talked to him." So am I, Elijah said. Then, after a beat, come to dinner with me. Lena's breath caught. Elijah, no pressure, he said smoothly. No expectations, just dinner. No Benjamin, no tutoring, just us. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. The push and pull between them had been building for weeks, but this was different. This wasn't him testing her boundaries. This was him giving her a choice, and for the first time she wasn't sure she wanted to say no. After a long silence, she finally spoke. All right. She could hear the satisfaction in his voice when he responded. I'll pick you up at 7. When the sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment, Lena hesitated for only a moment before stepping outside. Elijah emerged from the driver's side, dressed in a tailored black suit, every inch the picture of effortless power. But when he looked at her, something in his expression softened. You look beautiful. She glanced down at her dress, a simple navy blue piece that hugged her just enough to feel elegant. You don't look so bad yourself. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly as he opened the door for her. Flattery will get you everywhere. She shook her head, but slid into the car. The restaurant was intimate but luxurious, the kind of place where privacy was valued, where the lighting was just dim enough to make everything feel a little more personal. As they settled at their table, Elijah leaned forward slightly. You're nervous. Lena exhaled, setting her napkin in her lap. I'm not used to this. He tilted his head. This, she gestured vaguely. The attention, the extravagance, something flickered in his gaze. I don't want you to feel like you have to fit into my world, Lena. She held his gaze. Then what do you want? His answer was immediate. You, her breath caught. Elijah reached across the table, his fingers brushing over hers. No expectations, he murmured. No pressure. Just us. Lena stared at their hands, at the way his touch felt warm, grounding. Then finally she let herself relax. All right, she whispered. Dinner was easy, easier than she expected. Elijah, for all his power and intensity, had a way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room. He asked about her childhood, her career, her dreams, and he listened, really listened. By the time they left the restaurant, the air between them was different, not uncertain. Not hesitant, but something deeper, something real. When the car pulled up outside her apartment, Elijah walked her to the door, his movements slow, deliberate. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. This was nice. His gaze flickered downward, lingering on her lips for half a second before returning to her eyes. It was, she hesitated. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Elijah exhaled, his hands settling lightly on her waist. Lena, she smiled, stepping back. Good night, Elijah. His fingers curled slightly as if he was resisting the urge to pull her back, but then he let her go. For now, he murmured, and as she stepped inside, she knew this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Weeks passed and things between them shifted, slowly at first, then all at once. Lena found herself spending more time at the Penthouse, not just for Benjamin's sessions, but for dinners, for late-night conversations, for moments stolen in between their busy lives. Elijah didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply showed her, in 1,000 small ways, that he was serious. And when he kissed her for the first time, standing on his balcony with the city glittering below, she knew she was already his. Months later, Elijah took her to a private estate in the countryside for the weekend. It was quiet, secluded, breathtakingly beautiful. As they walked along a stone pathway lined with lanterns, Lena turned to him, suspicion in her gaze. You're up to something. Elijah slid his hands into his pockets, his expression deceptively casual. Am I? She narrowed her eyes. You have that look, he smirked. What look? The one that says you're about to change my life. Elijah stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I intend to. Before she could respond, he pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Lena's breath hitched. Elijah lowered himself to one knee, holding the box open to reveal a stunning, elegantly simple diamond ring. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost nervous. I never expected you, he admitted, but now I can't imagine my life without you. Lena pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart hammering. Elijah exhaled, his voice quieter now. Marry me, Lena. She let out a shaky laugh, blinking back unexpected tears. You really don't like hearing no, do you? His lips twitched. Not when it comes to you. She took a deep breath then, without hesitation, nodded. Yes, Elijah let out a breath of relief before sliding the ring onto her finger. Then he stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her like he never intended to stop. And she knew, without a doubt, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Their wedding was an intimate affair, held in an elegant garden overlooking the ocean. Benjamin stood proudly beside Elijah, grinning as he watched them exchange vows. When Elijah kissed her, sealing their future together, Lena knew she hadn't just fallen in love with a billionaire. She had fallen in love with the man underneath. And as they stepped onto the dance floor, wrapped in each other's arms, she whispered the only words that mattered. I love you. Elijah's grip tightened, his voice low, certain. And I will love you for the rest of my life. And for the first time, Lena believed in forever.